The rain fell in cold sheets across the hiring square, turning the packed earth into a slick confusion of mud and straw. And Ayla Emerson stood at the edge of the crowd with her shoulders hunched and her hands clasped before her, watching one farmer after another point to someone else. She had been here since dawn, when the first lantern still flickered against the gray morning. And now the sun hung somewhere behind the clouds at midday while her feet ached and her stomach twisted with the familiar weight of knowing she would leave empty-handed again. The other workers had mostly been chosen by now, pulled forward by calloused fingers or curt nods, and the square was thinning out as wagons rolled away with new hands perched in the back. Ayla kept her eyes down, tracing the curve of a puddle with her gaze, watching the ripples spread each time a raindrop struck the surface. She was used to this. The passing over. The way eyes would land on her green skin, her small tusks, her pointed ears, and then slide away as though she were a post or a stone, something to step around rather than toward. Sometimes they looked longer, with distaste curling their mouths, and those moments were worse, because at least then she was seen. Most of the time she was simply invisible, a shape at the edge of the crowd that never quite resolved into a person worth hiring. She had worked when she could find it, small jobs that lasted a week or two before the coins ran out, or the farmer's wife complained, or someone decided an orc was more trouble than the labor was worth. She slept in haylofts when she was lucky, under bridges when she was not, and ate whatever she could afford or forage. It was a thin sort of life, stretched tight over the hours and days, and she had long since stopped expecting it to change. The square was nearly empty now. A few stragglers remained, other workers whose luck had run as poorly as hers, and the last handful of farmers who had come late or were too particular to settle. Ayla shifted her weight from one foot to the other and felt the cold water seep through the worn sole of her boot. She should leave. There was no point standing here until the rain stopped or night fell, no point offering herself up to rejection one more time. But leaving meant admitting the day was lost, and she was not quite ready for that. Not yet. She whispered it without meaning to, the words barely louder than the rain. No one has ever chosen me. It was not self-pity exactly, just a fact spoken aloud because sometimes facts needed air to breathe. She had been passed over at every fair, every work call, every hiring line she had ever stood in. She had been tolerated sometimes, pitied once or twice, but chosen. Picked because someone saw something in her they wanted. Never. A shadow fell across the puddle she had been watching. Ayla looked up, startled, and found a man standing in front of her. He was tall but not towering, broad-shouldered in the way of someone who worked with his hands, and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead by the rain. His face was hard to read, all straight lines and stillness, but his eyes were steady on hers. He did not look disgusted. He did not look away. He simply looked, and then, after a moment that felt longer than it was, he smiled. It was a small smile, barely a shift of his mouth, but it was there. He reached out his hand. Ayla stared at it. At the rough palm, the dirt under the nails, the scars across the knuckles. She did not understand. People did not reach for her. They pointed sometimes or gestured from a distance, but they did not reach. Not like this. Not with an open hand and a quiet patience that said he would wait as long as it took for her to decide. "You are looking for work," he said. His voice was low and even, not a question. She nodded, still staring at his hand. "I have work," he said. "If you want it." Ayla's throat felt tight. She wanted to ask why. Why her, why now, why reach out when everyone else had walked past? But the words stuck, and instead she lifted her own hand, hesitant and shaking, and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite the rain, and he gave a single nod as though something had been settled. "My name is Fletcher Calloway," he said. "I run a goat dairy up past the ridge. It is not easy work, but it is steady." "I can work," Ayla said quickly. "I can work hard. I will not disappoint you." He studied her for a moment, then released her hand and turned toward a wagon hitched at the edge of the square. "Come on, then. We are losing daylight." She followed him in a daze, her boots squelching through the mud, and climbed into the wagon bed when he gestured to it. He did not speak again as he took the reins and guided the two sturdy mares out of the square and onto the road that led north. Ayla sat with her back against the side of the wagon and watched the town fall away behind them, the buildings growing smaller and the fields opening up on either side. The rain began to ease, softening to a drizzle, and the clouds thinned enough to let through a pale wash of sunlight. She could not quite believe it was real, that someone had chosen her, that she was riding in a wagon toward work that might last longer than a week. She kept waiting for him to change his mind, to pull the wagon over and tell her he had made a mistake. But he did not. He simply drove, his gaze fixed on the road, and said nothing at all. The dairy sat in a shallow valley between two wooded hills, a sturdy stone house with a slate roof and a large barn built close beside it. There were pens for the goats, a small vegetable garden, a chicken coop, and a shed that looked like it held tools or feed. Everything was well kept but worn, the kind of place that had been worked hard for years and showed it. Fletcher pulled the wagon up to the barn and climbed down without ceremony. "Goats need milking twice a day," he said, walking toward the barn door. "Morning and evening. The milk gets strained and stored in the cold room, and once a week we make cheese. There is feeding, mucking, fence repair, and whatever else comes up. You will sleep in the loft above the barn. It is warm and dry." Ayla followed him inside, taking in the rows of stalls, the neat stacks of hay, the stone-lined cold room built into the back wall. The goats watched her with curious eyes, some bleating softly, and the smell of animals and straw wrapped around her like a blanket. It was a good smell, a safe smell. "I will show you the milking," Fletcher said, pulling a stool and bucket from a hook on the wall. "Watch first." He sat beside one of the goats and began to milk with practiced hands, the rhythm steady and sure. Ayla watched the way his fingers moved, the angle of the bucket, the calm patience he showed the animal. When he finished, he stood and handed her the stool. "Your turn." She sat nervous and reached for the goat's udder. Her first attempts were clumsy, too fast and too rough, and the goat shifted irritably. Fletcher crouched beside her, not touching, just watching. "Slower," he said. "Gentle. She will give you what you need if you do not rush." Ayla tried again, and this time the milk came in a thin stream that pinged against the bottom of the bucket. She felt a flicker of pride, small but bright, and kept going until the stream slowed to nothing. Fletcher nodded. "Good enough. You will get better." She did. Over the following days, she learned the rhythm of the dairy, the particular needs of each goat, the way to strain the milk without losing any to spillage. Fletcher showed her how to make the cheese, the careful balance of heat and time and pressure, and she watched his hands move with the same steady patience he had shown at the fair. He did not talk much. He gave instructions when needed and answered her questions with short, clear sentences, but he did not fill the silence with chatter or ask her about her past. She was grateful for that. The silence felt safe, a space where she could simply work and learn and not worry about saying the wrong thing. She slept in the loft, where Fletcher had set up a narrow bed with clean blankets and a small chest for her belongings. It was the first time in months she had slept somewhere warm and dry, and the first night she woke 3 times convinced it was a dream. But each time she opened her eyes, the loft was still there, the goats breathing softly below, and the knowledge settled over her again that this was real. Someone had chosen her. The days folded into weeks. Spring rain gave way to early summer sun, and the valley turned green and lush. Ayla rose before dawn to milk the goats, spent her mornings tending the animals and repairing fences, and her afternoons helping Fletcher with the cheese. He taught her to recognize when the curds were ready, how to press them just right, how to age them in the cool dark of the cellar. She learned quickly, and he never had to tell her something twice. She wanted to prove herself, to show him that choosing her had not been a mistake, and she threw herself into the work with a fierce determination that left her exhausted every night. Fletcher noticed. He did not say much about it, but she caught him watching her sometimes, a thoughtful expression on his face. Once, when she was hauling a bucket of water that was too heavy and her arms were shaking, he took it from her without a word and carried it himself. Another time, when she skipped lunch to finish mucking the stalls, he brought her a plate of bread and cheese and set it on the fence post beside her. "Eat," he said, and walked away before she could thank him. Small moments like that. Small kindnesses that made her chest ache in a way she did not quite understand. She had never been cared for like this, never been noticed without being judged. Fletcher did not treat her like an orc or a charity case or a burden. He treated her like a person who worked beside him, whose effort mattered, whose presence had value. It was such a simple thing, and it cracked something open inside her that she had thought was sealed shut. She fell for him quietly, in the spaces between tasks. In the way he moved through the dairy with calm confidence, the way he spoke gently to the goats, the way he smiled that rare, small smile when the cheese turned out well. She did not mean to. She had not come here looking for anything except work and a roof over her head. But Fletcher was steady in a way no one else had ever been, and his steadiness made her feel like she could breathe. She did not tell him. How could she? He had given her a job and a place to sleep, and she was not foolish enough to risk that by confessing feelings he probably did not share. So she kept them tucked away and focused on the work, on making herself indispensable, on proving every day that he had made the right choice. Then Garrett Howell came to visit. He arrived on a bright morning in early summer, riding a fine chestnut horse and wearing clothes that looked too clean for farm work. Ayla was in the yard, scrubbing out the milk buckets, when he dismounted and walked toward the house. Fletcher came out to meet him, and the two men shook hands with the careful politeness of neighbors who were not quite friends. "Fletcher," Garrett said, his voice smooth and easy. "Good to see you. How is the dairy?" "Well enough," Fletcher said. Garrett's gaze slid past him and landed on Ayla. She felt the weight of it, the assessing look that took in her green skin and her work-worn clothes. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Is that your hired hand?" he asked. "She is," Fletcher said. "Interesting choice." Garrett's tone was light, but there was something underneath it that made Ayla's stomach tighten. "I did not know you were hiring." "I hired at the fair last month," Fletcher said. His voice was as even as ever, but Ayla thought she heard a thread of something sharper beneath it. Garrett nodded slowly, still looking at Ayla. "I see. Well, if you ever find she does not work out, send her my way. I could use someone who knows dairy work. I would pay better than you can, I expect." Fletcher's jaw tightened just a fraction. "She works out fine." Of course, of course." Garrett raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Just an offer. Think about it." He left after that, riding back down the road with a casual wave, and Fletcher stood in the yard watching him go. Ayla set down the bucket she had been scrubbing and wiped her hands on her apron, her heart pounding. "I am not going anywhere," she said. Fletcher looked at her, his expression unreadable. "He would pay you more." "I do not care." "You should," he said quietly. "You should care about what is best for you." Ayla shook her head, frustration rising in her chest. "What is best for me is staying here, working here, with you. Something shifted in his face, a flicker of emotion too quick to name. "People leave," he said. "They always do." She realized then that this was not just about Garrett's offer. This was about something older, something that had nothing to do with her at all. Fletcher had been left before. His sister, maybe, who had moved away and left him to run the dairy alone, or someone else. It did not matter who. What mattered was the way he was looking at her now, like he was waiting for her to prove him right. "I am not people," Ayla said. "I am me, and I am staying." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and turned back toward the house. Ayla watched him go, her hands still shaking, and knew that Garrett's visit had planted a seed of doubt she would have to root out somehow. Garrett came back 2 more times over the following weeks. Each time, he made the same offer, his tone growing a little more insistent. He was a wealthy man, he said. He could offer her better wages, a room in the main house, easier work. He made it sound like Fletcher was doing her a disservice by keeping her here, like she was a fool for staying. Ayla refused him every time, but she could see the way Fletcher watched the exchanges, the way his shoulders grew tighter and his silences longer. One evening, after Garrett had ridden away for the 3rd time, Fletcher found her in the barn. She was brushing down one of the goats, her movements automatic, and she did not look up when he approached. "You should take his offer," Fletcher said. Ayla's hand stilled. "No, he can give you more than I can." "I do not want more, Ayla." His voice was rough, like the words were costing him something. "You do not owe me anything. I hired you, you worked. That is all it is." She set down the brush and turned to face him, anger flaring hot and sudden. "That is not all it is. Not to me." He looked at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something raw in his expression. "Then what is it?" "It is home," she said, her voice breaking. "It is the first place I have ever felt like I belonged. It is you choosing me when no one else did. It is knowing that I matter here, that the work I do matters, that you see me as more than just an orc you hired out of pity." "I did not hire you out of pity," Fletcher said quietly. "Then why?" She stepped closer, her hands clenched at her sides. "Why did you choose me?" "Out of everyone in that square, why me?" He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was so low she almost missed it. "Because you looked like I felt." Ayla stared at him. "What?" "Like no one saw you," he said. "Like you had been standing there your whole life, waiting for someone to notice. I know what that feels like." Her throat tightened. "Fletcher." "I chose you because I wanted to," he said, each word deliberate. "Not because I pitied you, not because I needed just anyone. Because I saw you, and I thought maybe you would see me back. And you did. You do." The barn felt smaller suddenly, the air between them charged with something fragile and fierce. Ayla's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "Garrett thinks I will leave you," she said. "He thinks everyone leaves you. Is that what happened? Did your sister leave?" Fletcher nodded. "She married. Moved to the coast. I do not blame her for it. But yes, she left. And my parents are gone. And everyone else I thought might stay eventually found somewhere better to be." "I will not," Ayla said. "I will not leave. I am staying here, Fletcher. I am staying with you, not because I owe you, not because I have nowhere else to go, because I choose to, because I choose you." He looked at her for a long, breathless moment, and then he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. It was not a tentative embrace, not careful or restrained. It was solid and sure, his arms tight around her shoulders, and Ayla pressed her face against his chest and felt something inside her finally settle into place. "I would choose you again," Fletcher said into her hair. "At the fair. In the rain. I would choose you every time." Ayla pulled back just enough to look up at him, and when he bent his head and kissed her, slow and deliberate, she felt like the world had rearranged itself into something kinder. Something right. When Garrett came by again a week later, Ayla met him at the gate before he could dismount. Fletcher stood a few paces behind her, his arms crossed, and she felt his presence like a shield at her back. "I am not interested," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I am staying here. Stop coming by." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "You are turning down better wages to stay with a man who can barely keep this place running." "I am staying with the man who chose me," Ayla said. "The man I choose. Now leave." Garrett looked between her and Fletcher, and whatever he saw in their faces made him shake his head. "Suit yourself," he said, and rode away without another word. Ayla turned back to Fletcher, and he reached out to take her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They stood like that in the sunlight, the valley green and alive around them, and Ayla thought about all the years she had spent waiting to be chosen, and how Fletcher had done it without fanfare or hesitation. How he had simply reached out his hand and she had taken it, and that had been enough. They were married in the autumn, when the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp. It was a small ceremony, just the two of them and a traveling priest who happened to be passing through the valley. They spoke their vows in the yard between the house and the barn, with the goats bleating softly in the background. And when the priest pronounced them wed, Fletcher kissed her again with that same slow deliberation that made her knees weak. They worked the dairy together through the winter, learning each other's rhythms in the way that married people do. Ayla discovered that Fletcher liked his tea strong and his mornings quiet, that he hummed tunelessly when he thought no one was listening, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. Fletcher learned that Ayla talked to the goats like they were people, that she had a talent for fixing things that seemed beyond repair, that she cried easily at small kindnesses, but faced hardship without flinching. By the time spring came again, the dairy was thriving. Their cheeses had earned a reputation in the surrounding villages, and orders came in faster than they could fill them. They hired another hand to help with the goats, a young human man named Peter who did not blink at Ayla's green skin and worked hard without complaint. The three of them fell into an easy partnership, and the dairy felt less like a place of work and more like a piece of something larger, something built with care and effort and love. When the summer market came to the nearest town, Fletcher loaded the wagon with their best cheeses and asked Ayla if she wanted to come along. She had not been back to a town since the hiring fair, and the thought made her stomach twist, but she nodded. She was not the same person she had been a year ago. She had a home now, a husband, a life she had chosen. The market was loud and crowded, full of vendors hawking their wares and customers shouting good-natured insults over prices. Fletcher set up their stall with calm efficiency, arranging the cheeses on the table and pinning a small sign with their farm's name above it. Ayla stood beside him, her hands folded in front of her, and watched the people stream past. A few stared at her, but most were more interested in the cheeses, and she relaxed as the morning wore on. By midday, they had sold more than half their stock. Fletcher handled the transactions with his usual quiet competence, and Ayla wrapped the cheeses in cloth and handed them to customers with a growing sense of pride. This was theirs. They had made this together. Near the end of the afternoon, a man in a fine coat approached the stall. He was older, with gray hair and sharp eyes, and he studied the cheeses with the air of someone who knew what he was looking for. He picked up a wedge of their aged cheddar, sniffed it, and nodded. "This is good work," he said. "Who made it?" "We both did," Fletcher said. The man looked at Ayla, his gaze assessing but not unkind. "You are the cheesemaker, one of them," she said. He smiled. "Well, you have a gift. This is some of the best cheddar I have tasted in years. I am a judge for the market competition. I think you should enter." Ayla glanced at Fletcher, who raised an eyebrow. We did not know there was a competition. There is, the man said. Entry's close in an hour. You should submit this. He tapped the cheddar. I think you would do well. They entered the competition on a whim, more curious than hopeful, and spent the rest of the afternoon selling the last of their stock. When the results were announced at sunset, Ayla was cleaning up the stall and did not hear the first call. Fletcher touched her arm and pointed toward the judging platform, where the man in the fine coat was holding up a blue ribbon and calling their farm's name. They had won. Ayla stared at the ribbon as the man handed it to Fletcher, her mind struggling to catch up. They had won. Their cheese, the cheese they had made together in the cold room of the dairy, had been judged the best at the market. Fletcher's rare smile broke across his face, wide and genuine, and he handed the ribbon to Ayla. You should hold it, he said. You earned it. She took it with shaking hands, the silk smooth against her fingers, and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. A year ago, she had stood in the rain at the hiring fair, invisible and unchosen, convinced that no one would ever see her as anything more than an inconvenience. And now she stood in the center of a crowded market, holding a ribbon that said her work mattered, with a man beside her who had chosen her and kept choosing her every day. They drove home as the sun set, the wagon creaking over the familiar road, and Ayla held the ribbon in her lap like a talisman. Fletcher was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need filling. When they reached the dairy, he helped her down from the wagon and stood with his hands on her waist, looking at her in the fading light. I am proud of you, he said. Ayla smiled, feeling the warmth of it spread through her chest. I am proud of us. Yes, he said, and kissed her softly. Us. They hung the ribbon on the wall of the house above the fireplace where they could see it every day. It became a reminder of what they had built together, not just the dairy but the life around it. They were chosen, both of them, and they chose each other in return. It was such a simple thing, really. A hand reached out in the rain, a decision made. A life built one day at a time, with patience and care, and the kind of love that grew slowly and held fast. And in the years that followed, when people asked Ayla how she had come to the dairy, she would think back to that rainy morning in the hiring square and the quiet man who had seen her when no one else did. She would remember the way he had smiled, small and rare, and reached for her without hesitation. She would remember the way her life had changed in that single moment, how everything she had ever wanted had been waiting in the form of a steady hand and a place to belong. She had been chosen. And she had chosen back. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.